All right, everyone. Thank you. Thanks so much. It's really exciting. This is a great venue. This has been a great event. Let's really give a round of applause for the team at PFL. This is really impressive and personalized, like they said. So for those of you who don't know me, haven't met me before, haven't heard me speak, I'll warn you, sometimes I do drop the odd F-bomb, but I do so for emphasis. So, that's kind of your warning if you want to go to the bathroom. But a couple things about me. First off, I'm falling in love with Montana, but I am from Canada. I'm from Toronto, so you'll hear some accents. There you go. Yeah, we were on a plane together. And my passion is marketing. I mean, I grew up dreaming to be a marketer, dreaming to be honest, to do more things like Super Bowl commercials. That's what I wanted to do when I was 12. And then somewhere along the way, I realized B2B marketing is way sexier, way cooler than Super Bowl commercials or anything like that. And now these days, being involved in starting a company that helps in the marketing space and also being a CMO is a dream come true for me. And it's great because I get to go out and I get to talk to marketers like yourselves about things that are on their mind. And when I reached out to Yarby, last couple of weeks to find out what should I talk about, he said, the talk today should really be about ABM. Like a lot of people who are here are trying to figure out how to engage with their audience in a more one-to-one basis. Now, I was on a solo bus last night with the Paycor team, and we were kidding. It was like, they're a customer of ours. So I was like, I coordinated this whole bus just for the two of us. We all missed the first bus. But we said ABM is sometimes this complicated word. And for some of us, we get confused what it means. It doesn't always have to mean that you're going after an account in my mind. It's more about being more personalized. And that's what I really want to talk about today. Because I think when we think about this ABM word, we often, with a lot of terms, we get stuck at the root meaning of that term. Now, when anyone seen this movie? This is one of my favorite movies, by the way. Field of Dreams, if you don't recognize it. And we all know that famous line in the movie. The line is, if you build it, they will come. And it's this promise that if we build something, that everything is just going to naturally work out. And I think in marketing, a lot of us struggle from that type of mindset, right? We say things like, well, as long as we tier our accounts, as long as we pick the accounts that we're going after, then naturally everyone's going to come and buy from us, right? Or we say to salespeople, we gave you the list, why aren't they closing? Now, I know that people in this room kind of get that we have to go a step further than that. There's been great examples given by some of the presentations over the last few days that show that you're doing the right things to engage your audience. And that's a term that I'm starting to hear a lot more. I don't know if some of you have heard this. This is a report that comes from a friend of mine named Laura Ramos. Laura's an analyst at Forrester, and she did some research where she said, we got to go beyond this association that account-based marketing is picking our accounts. And we've got to get into this mindset that we have to do things, and my favorite one that you can see the background here, this idea of choreographing your customers' dance steps. Right? This idea that we have to help figure out where to go next and help guide that customer like we would in any fancy dance. And just so if anyone knows, I actually do dance class every year. So this slide was very near and dear to my heart. I have a 9-year-old daughter, and we do a father-daughter dance, and it's amazing. Best bonding experience. My wife always thinks it's bullshit because she's like, I take her to every practice. Why don't I get to do the dance with her? But in those moves, my daughter is choreographing the dance steps for me. She's guiding me where to go next. I'm improvising because I can't follow the steps, but I've got a rough idea of where I want to go. And that's what we have to be thinking from a marketing perspective. Now, this term engagement that Laura uses, and I think a lot of you have been using, over the last couple of days, in one way or another, the idea of engagement ultimately leads us to needing content, right? Think about everything that we're talking about today. The boxes that all of you are sending in one way or another, they open up and there is content inside of there, right? The box is kind of your medium. It's your opportunity to get in front of them and engage them. But what we do once we engage them is the most important. And that's what do we put in front of them. That doesn't just apply for us when we send boxes. Same thing applies, say, if we're doing a retargeted ad, or say if we're doing an email. In all these cases, we engage them with that medium, and then we have to figure out where we're going to link them to at the end of the day. And that's where this term content, I'm going to call it somewhat around 10 years ago, even though I know companies like John Deere and others have been using content for almost a century. But the rise of content marketing about 10 years ago turned all of us to the mindset that as long as we create content, people will buy from us. Right? And I think that's a bit of the problem that comes with this idea, that as long as we build it, they will come. Right? We're back to the field of dreams mentality. If we write all these blog posts, if we write all these ebooks, then they will come. Now, don't get me wrong. SEO is something we can definitely optimize around. And when we optimize for SEO, that is a way to bring people in. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're creating the right content just because we've optimized for SEO. The key is, how do we start to think about what content we're going to put in front of each other? Now, I'm going to show you a little bit of what's been happening in the space of content over the last number of years that's reflecting this big shift. Now, this is some more research coming from Forrester. So I'm going to take you back to 2017, which feels not too long ago, but in tech is like a decade, right? And this is 2017. This is what Forrester calls their content marketing wave. And in that wave, if anyone ever reads Forrester reports, they often have what they call criteria, right? I think the proper term is criterion if their citations group is here right now. Anyways, there's 5 different criteria you can see here. And a big focus still in the early days of this 10-year span that we've all been invested in content was, what are the things that we're doing to get that content out the door? How do we create enough content? And you can see at the end the idea of activation, which is really what we're talking about when we talk about engagement, wasn't really on the rise. So as you look at what that 2017 Forrester wave looked like, and if you haven't seen these before, the companies that move up to the right are the ones that are leading in that category. You can see that the companies that are here were very focused on, how do I help you, the marketer, create content? That's really important. I'm not going to talk to you about why content creation is not important, but we're not going to talk about content creation today. We're going to talk about, what do we do with the content that we've already created? So fast forward 2 years, 2019 Forrester wave comes out, and a huge change happens in this wave. Number one, they start to focus it more on B2B versus B2C. They create 2 different waves. And in the B2B, you can see a huge shift in terms of the focus on activation. Right? It went to becoming the most important aspect of what we do with the content that we create, right? And you fast forward to what that wave looked like as well. There was a lot of shifting around. Companies who were leaders were no longer leaders. Companies like my company, Uberflip, ended up coming on to this because we don't do any of that content creation stuff. We admit that. We have great partners. Some of the companies on here, they're great partners of ours who help you create content. But the question that we help solve, and you heard, even this morning from a company like Medtronic about, how do we send people to these content destinations? Where do we engage people at the end of the day? So this is what those 4 criteria look like. As I said, we don't do anything on the left. I'm not going to talk too much about Uberflip, but I wanted to help you level set where I focus when I do a lot of my talks. It's this idea of activation, right? And the reality here is that, to activate our audience, we require to deliver a great content experience. This is something that Laura Ramos says to me all the time. She's like, don't get caught up on that term activation. It's very technical. The idea is, where are we sending people to? And when we send people to something, we need to send them to a great experience. This, Yarby talked about how I'm really passionate about this. This is something I was so passionate about, I ended up writing a book. And this is the part, depending on your comfort level, you can close your eyes. I came up with the title, writing a blog post, all right? And the blog post, before I show you the cover, if you don't know the book, the blog post, usually when I write a blog post, I'll be on an airplane and I pump out a blog post and I send it to my team and they're like, nice, one less piece of content we have to create. This time, I sent the title, which I'll show you now, and they're like, there is no way in the world we are posting this blog post. We are going to offend everyone we sell to, everyone we want to sell to. Our customers are going to leave us. And I was like, just relax, just read the actual blog post, because I knew they didn't make it past the headline, which was the equivalent of the cover at that point. And I got replies back saying, it's great, I get it, but can we change the word to stop content marketing? Like, it's so much softer. And I said, no, that's not the point at all here. The problem is, I don't want anyone in this room to stop creating content, but I want you to create content and think about how it's going to be used at the end of the day. Right? And that was the idea within this book, which honestly took me 4.5 months to get them to allow me to post the blog post. And then it got a lot of it got mixed reactions, obviously, but overall, I think a lot of people started to nod their head and they said, you know what, you're right. What is the point of me creating content if that content's not going to get used, if it's not going to get leverage? So we'll talk more about that as we go in, but that idea of leveraging content is so important. Now, this is a stat that comes from Serious Decisions, now part of Forrester, actually. And this one actually really got me going when I was writing this book. I couldn't believe this stat. I actually reached out to Serious to say, like, what do you mean? And they said, you know, it's not about whether you use the content on your website, right? I mean, how many of us think of all of our content's being used because naturally it's on our website, it's in our blog, it's in our resource center. That is not using content. And I want you to think about it this way. There used to be a great joke, right? Depending on your humor level. A great joke, which was, where's the best place to hide something? Anyone know this one? Page 2 of Google results, right? Kind of light, humor, it's all right. The reality today is that joke's no longer relevant. That joke was relevant like 8 years ago. Now, the answer would be result number 2 on Google, right? It's not even page 2 because we don't go to result 2. Think about it. How many of you have like a Google Home or Alexa device or an Echo? I'm going to set off someone's device here right now. Raise the hands. Do you have one of those in your house? All right. So all of us are adopting these tools. And when we speak to them, what are we essentially asking for? We're asking for the first result. We're asking for the most relevant result that Google thinks. If you ever go to Google's homepage, not search in the bar, there's a button still that either says search or I'm feeling lucky, right? It's still there. Like, go to your laptop, check it out. It says I'm feeling lucky. That is what you're doing when you ask, Google Home what to do. And that's what all of us are starting to expect. So when we say we've posted it onto our website and it starts to live down that long scroll, 17 results down or 17 pages down, we're kidding ourselves if people are going to go find that content or if we can say that it's actually being used. And this is where we start to have this idea of content experience. Now, the ability to find that content, to package that content is just one element. I'll start to unpack it, but I'm not the only one talking about this term anymore. It's been a big, even year for content experience. One of the groups that I've got a lot of respect for, in addition to more traditional analysts, is groups like G2, which are no longer called G2 Crowd, but G2. And my friend Ryan there is CMO. We were chatting one day, and we were looking at this. This is like their equivalent of a wave. And we looked at it, we said, this is really confusing, like, especially for all of you to understand this. So much going on here. And as I told you earlier, a lot of these companies are partners of mine. Like, we don't compete with each other. What does this really mean? What is it that we're trying to accomplish with content marketing? And Ryan and his team then went away and said, we're going to kill this grid. And they actually went and they created 3 separate grids. These were the 3 grids. I was really excited, obviously, about the one in the middle there, because it started to reflect that there is a turning to the importance of content experience. So as much as I say this, as much as, I don't think there's any analysts in the room. As much as analysts say stuff and we're like, okay, does it really matter? The question is, does it really matter, right? And, it's a true story. This is in January of this past year. I was talking to a CMO, and she called me and she said, and we had a good rapport, so she's like, I keep hearing the content experience term everywhere. I think we're going to start to do content experience in Q4. And just like that, I gave a little chuckle. And she's like, why are you laughing? She's like, I thought you'd be thrilled. I'm probably going to need Uberflip. And I was like, if you need Uberflip, that's great. I was like, but to suggest that you're going to do it in Q4 would suggest that you're not doing anything now tied to content experience. She's like, no, we're doing nothing tied to content experience right now. We're just creating content. That's all we're doing. We still have more content we have to create before we can even focus on experience. I was like, okay, that's fair. So, I instantly, I always think of analogies, and this line came to my mind, this idea, like, if a tree falls in the forest, we all know the debatable line, does it make a sound, right? So what I did is I actually wanted to prove my point to this woman after. I wanted to send her a video to kind of like really reinforce this. So I found like the most over-the-top video that I could, where it was this guy who had taken a GoPro camera and left it in the forest waiting for this tree to fall down to determine if it made a sound. And the question here is, does it make a sound? I'll let you guys all weigh in. This this was as over the top as I could be with this CMO. And we have a good rapport, so she was able to laugh at it. And obviously we all know, like, it does make a sound. I understand the point we're trying to make. And that's the same thing that we have to think about in terms of not putting focus beyond the creation of the content that we do, right? If we say we're going to do this in Q4, right, it does make a sound yet again, right? It makes an impact on what we're doing. And the maybe more like right to your gut, right to your heart feeling that you'll debate is, the question is, ignoring this aspect of our approach and our go-to-market, is it actually costing us deals? And we start to think about it that way, we're like, oh my God, right? Like, that's really scary. And that's really this idea of content experience. And the CMO that I was talking to at this point, I don't want to say her name, but she was like, okay, great, I get it, it's important, maybe we'll do this in Q2. So at that point, she's like, all right, so like, what do we have to do to nail this? And I told you earlier I was going to break down, like, what is it really take to have a great content experience? So let me give you 3 terms that come to my mind when I think about the experiences that my team, remember I'm a CMO too, so that my team, that we've put forth a lot of focus on every single time. So I'll unpack these for you one at a time. The first one is environment. Really simply thought of, this is, how does it look? How does it feel in front of our audience? And we do this all the time, right? We A/B test colors, button placement, location, all this kind of stuff. We do this on our homepage, on landing pages. As marketers, we're used to this stuff. This is easy, right? But I want you to think about it this way in terms of content, right? Now, I'll use a couple of analogies as we go through these terms. The first one is this one, okay? So in my house that I grew up, really scary basement, but first off, I'm Canadian, as I told you, so we could drink at 19. So I was still living at home with no shame at that point. And the nice thing was, when you went down to that basement, you could find a beer in the fridge, you open up that beer, and if you're like me, and you like Corona, but if you're not like me, this works with a pina colada. So just imagine this is a pina colada, okay? And stick with me through this analogy. So, beer pretty much always tastes good, even in a dingy, dungy, musty basement, right? But I want you all, do me a favor, close your eyes just for 3 seconds here, okay? I want to close your eyes. And I want you to think about drinking that beer in a very different setting. You can open up your eyes now, right? It tastes completely different on the beach. I don't know what it is. It's the same recipe, whether you're in Costa Rica or you're in your basement, right? It's the same ingredients. They don't have a special recipe there. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the sweat down the bottle. I don't know if it's like the beautiful people, the heat around us. But there's something about that beach where I always drink 3 times the amount of Coronas than I do in my basement, right? And maybe it's my kids that I have to go upstairs to, but there's something about it that locks me in. And that's the idea that we have to think about. The content, if you will, inside of the Corona is the same. Like, for all of us, the content's the same. But it's the surroundings that determine whether we stick around, whether we take one more, right? We want people to consume more of our content, /beer, /Corona, however, pina colada, however you think about it, right? That's the goal. All right, let's keep going here. I'm going to do the same thing for you with structure, help you understand what I mean when we talk about tagging and organizing content in a logical way. I'm going to do that with another analogy for you. Does anyone still remember what these are? Today, these are probably Starbucks on every corner. They used to be a Blockbuster on every corner, right? And this is where we went to get movies. Now, if I went to get a movie, and I'm going to take you back to the 90s or something like that, and I went to get Apollo 13, okay? So Apollo 13, great movie, Tom Hanks. If I went in and it was a new release, we all know where to go, right? It's an A, so far left, first, maybe second day, debatable whether it's in stock, that's another talk. And we get there, we go home, and now we say, you know what, that was so great. I want to watch another movie. I want to watch another Tom Hanks movie because I am ready to binge on Tom Hanks. Now, it was a terrible injustice that there was no Tom Hanks shrine in Blockbuster. Should have been, right? Arguable again. But the reality is, what movie did I want? Did I want Forrest Gump? And if I wanted Forrest Gump, where would that live? Is it an action? Is it a drama? Is it a comedy? Honestly, I don't know, because I can't go back and fact check this inside of a Blockbuster because they don't exist anymore. But the way we organize content is so important, right? We know that this got disrupted. We know that there's a better way today, and we know what was done there. It was all about the organization of content. Yes, some of the other factors of how Netflix streamed, etc. But the organization of content is really what gets us to binge. It gets us to stay around. It gets us to watch that next episode. All right, let's go one more. I said 3, so we've got environment, we've got structure, engagement. That's our goal with our content. We want to engage people. We talked about that right at the gate here, right? So this is where we start to personalize. We make it more relevant. We do these little things, right? And I'm going to use, this one feels like it was just yesterday. But this is how we used to get music, right? And everyone always asks me, why is it $1.29? Because I'm Canadian and we pay at a terrible exchange rate on everything, right? So this was probably 99 cents for you back in the day. And if I was looking for some Jay-Z, I'm in a New York state of mind, if you will, and I download that track, right? What do I do next? I debate heavily buying that next track. And I probably listen to that same track over and over and over again, right? This model also got disrupted. We now know that there's much better ways to do this with Spotify. And the way Spotify operates amazes me. I mean, it locks me in. It's these words up at the top that I've highlighted for you, made for you, right? This is how we have to start to think to market to our audiences, that everything feels made for them. Same way that every one of us, if we took out our phones right now, we opened up Spotify, we would all, there's about 100 people in here, we'd have 100 different playlists made today for us, right? Now, don't get overwhelmed there, because it doesn't mean that Spotify is going and composing new AC/DC tracks for me, right? You don't have to create content for every one of your accounts, right? You just have to pull together the right content, and all of a sudden it feels like it's made for you. Okay, so I want to hit on Spotify just for one more moment, just to show you the impact that they've been able to have with their audience. This comes from a report by Mary Meeker. If you haven't read her Internet Trends report, definitely do so. It comes out once a year. This was back in 2018. So first chart, that's what we want to see, up to the right? More engagement, beautiful. But let's look at what was really happening there. And this is the most interesting stat to me. What it does, it looks from 2014 to 2017, 3-year period, and it says, in that period, us, when we opened Spotify, we went from listening to 68 artists a month, right? Musicians, to 112. So let me tell you a secret. Between 2014 and 2017, debatable, but music didn't get better, right? Arguably, it got worse. So what's happening? Why is it all of a sudden that people are starting to consume all these new artists? All they did was they started to put content in front of people that they cared about, that they didn't know that they'd care about. I can't tell you how often a marketer says to me, my audience doesn't care about my content. They're not looking for it. Right, they're not looking for it. But if we put it in front of them, if we introduce it to them in a natural way, you don't know what they might enjoy from what you have to offer. And that's the reality that we're living in today. This is the world that we're in, right? On the beach, listening to Spotify, playing on Netflix, drinking our beer, right? That is life, and somehow we expect that when we send them an email and we nail it because we know their first name, Dear Joe, that they're going to be like, oh my God, how did they know? Right? Those days are gone, right? Those days are gone. We need to understand that we are in a different world where we need to start to align to the expectations of consumers, even when it's in B2B, right? There's a company that we work with called Blackbaud. One of the things that they do really well, when they lock you into a stream of content, their goal is to get you to click on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? They get very often people to get up to 7 pieces of content on one visit. I can't remember who I was speaking to yesterday. They said one of their goals is to accelerate that buyer journey. Why wait 7 weeks to feed this content to someone, right? One of the things my kids can't understand, I have 3 kids, they're 12, 9, and 7, and when they open up Netflix and some of the episodes are being syndicated, it's new episodes weekly, and they're like, what is that? Why wait a week for the next episode? Right? I mean, that's how we used to consume content, but we're changing in terms of those expectations. And it's so important that we get content in front of people. I mean, this is data coming from Gartner this time that shows you the amount of time. We've all seen those reports that say 60% of research is done by the time they speak to sales. This includes the time when they're speaking to sales, and you can see how much time is done doing research. I'm a math guy. I just think very simple math, though. If I want to earn more of that 18% of the time with my sales team, my most expensive resource in my organization, what do I have to do? Right? Because they're talking to 3 different vendors, right? I just have to earn more than a third of the 82%. If I earn 50% of that 82%, or I earn all that 82%, who do you think they're going to spend more time talking to the vendor with, right? That's my goal, is to earn that time by giving them what they want when they want it. All right, so take you back to that CMO that I mentioned. And she said, okay, great, we're going to do this content experience thing. She's like, but we don't go to market with content. I was like, you're right, all right. She's like, and she gave me a bunch of different ones. We're going to talk more about ABM, but she's like, this is how I go to market. And I said to her, it's fair, but like try and execute on any of these campaigns and not link to a piece of content at the end, right? The reality is what all these things do is they drive us to a piece of content at the end of the day. That is our endpoint. So we've got to start to think about this idea of experience very much in the same way that we think traditionally about things like email nurture, right? Like my wife looks at this slide when I'm preparing slides and she's like, what do you do? Right? She's like, this looks really hard. I'm like, no, we dream like this. Like we can do this with our eyes closed. But we think this way from an email nurture perspective. We don't think this way with content. We don't think if they read that piece, then what's next? Right? We just high-five each other because there was high engagement in our ebook. That's not enough. Right? We need to think of content in more of a funnel type of operation. So I want to give you a way to do this at scale because a lot of time when people like this CMO start to buy in, they're like, okay, great, but we're struggling to do this at scale. So this is a framework. I unpack this a lot in the book that I wrote, which you can get on Amazon. But I'll unpack it for you very quickly. We're just going to break into a few of the different items in here. So I'm going to start with the idea of centralizing content. And I'm going to give you some examples. Some of them are consumer as well. This one's a consumer one. This is Sony, right? So I often go to places like Twitter and whatnot, and they direct me to some sort of content, right? And think about social. Often when we click on the link, that's our opportunity, like we said today, to engage, right? And I know a lot of us maybe not think about social, but I think social is a great distribution channel these days. But the thing that I hate when companies do is when I engage with them on a channel like Twitter, which they don't own, right? They don't own the audience there. And then they send me to another channel like like YouTube, right? And the problem here on YouTube, we all know this, right? Especially if you have kids, you'll know this. I'll tell you why in a moment. Is, you go there to watch this Sony video, you're locked, you're intrigued, it's great. But then what happens? As soon as it's nearing the end, there's that slide out. And you're like, oh, let's check out this Nikon video, right? That is the last thing that Sony wanted me to do. But we lose complete control. It's no different than our kids sitting there and all of a sudden they're watching like a Dora the Explorer video when they went on for something else. Then that Dora is killing someone. Like it gets really scary, and that's why we don't let our kids on YouTube, I hope, right? Now, the way we need to centralize content is, I'm not suggesting don't be on YouTube, I'm not suggesting don't be on Twitter, but link people back to sites that you control, to experiences that you control. This is a company called Stantec. The reason I love this example, they're a global organization in the architecture space. No excuses. Doesn't matter the language, right? They always house content that they can control that buyer journey. All right, let's keep going here. Then we talked about organization already. We talked about creating experiences like this that are going to lock us in, okay? What I want to do is just give you some ways to think about tagging your content. And when you tag your content, first off, this is not the sexy part. This is the part we all skip over because it's not fun, but we have to do it, right? We don't do this, we're not going to be able to do the fun stuff that I'm going to get to next, right? Now, this is our own tagging structure at Uberflip. This is how my team tags content. It's always evolving. One of the things we've started to do is we're not just tagging based on what is our audience looking for, we're tagging based on what is our team looking for. So we've started to tag content as an example recently tied to opportunity stage in Salesforce. So content at 60% so that someone on our team knows that they're looking for certain vertical content for a deal stuck at 60%. How do they progress it? They go in and they can build their own destination of content on the fly. Okay, now this is the fun stuff, right? This is the part where we start to make experiences made for that person, right? Now we can only do this though if we've done that hard work of centralizing content, having control of it, organizing it so we've got it at our fingertips. Now, I'm going to show you a few different examples here of different companies that are doing this really well. And I'm showing you at the top just some of the tools that they're using. You don't have to use Uberflip for this. You don't have to use Terminus. You can use some of the other companies in the ecosystem that do certain things or hack it away on your own. But this is something really cool. So my friend Daniel Day is a really smart ABM marketer over at Snowflake. And what he thinks of is when he does an ad, so this is the ad that he does in Terminus, and someone clicks on it, he wants that same degree of personalization to exist wherever they go to, right? So they build, you saw them, these individual pages where he's selling, in this case, to Uber, and saying these are the hand-picked pieces of content for that audience. Now, when Daniel started doing this, literally built 10 of these in the hackiest way possible, took him like 8 weeks to do, he used an agency, got huge engagement, he got called into an executive meeting, how did you do this, we want more, and they challenged him to do 100. And he's like, I can't do 100, there's no way I can do 100. They're like, well, go figure it out. And he went, and that's when we got to know him, and we started to build this together. And last I spoke to Daniel, which was about a month ago, he had built 1,500 of these streams for the different accounts. And you all look at that and you're like, oh my God, that's crazy. But you heard some of the numbers of boxes that people are sending out here, right? I mean, that's what we need to do. We need to ensure that every one of those boxes allows us to accelerate that buyer journey. All right, let's do another couple quick ones. I won't spend as much time on all these. This is my friends at Vidyard, great video platform. What they did is they actually, a lot of you probably get these emails with the personalized video, but the key there is when you're done watching that video, now you have a whole bunch of other content. In this case, they're selling to Intuit that's built for that account and handpicked for that account. So account-based marketing, some people here have said, it's not just about what we do in marketing, it's how we arm sales to do the same thing. All right, a couple more examples for you. This is actually Terminus this time, who's using this in conjunction with SalesLoft. So inside of their SalesLoft emails, they want people not just to send like some clever language, they want to link to content, and they want to control that content that people go to. Rather than giving 10 hyperlinks, did you ever get those emails? Like these 10 hyperlinks? I call them the black and blue email, because it just looks like a bad bruise, and I don't know where to click. I don't know which of the 10 URLs they want me to click on. And then somehow they expect that after I'm done, I'm going to come back to my inbox with my 30 new emails that came in during that time and click on the next URL. No way, right? What you do here, you click on the one link, and you drop into the background there, into that dedicated stream of content yet again. All right, let's talk boxes. This was a cool campaign that you could do with a company like PFL. Now, what we did here is, you heard me talk a lot about Netflix. So we built these campaign boxes that went out and said, we can help deliver you a Netflix-like experience, right? And what it did was it had some popcorn and some Skittles in the box, had a bowl for them to make the popcorn in, and it had a gift card that they would get a redemption code when they booked a demo with us to actually activate a year of Netflix on us, right? So they got something regardless, but if they called us, they got a little bit more. But here is the kicker. If they were intrigued and they didn't want to talk to us yet, we wanted to make sure that there was a next step. So every one of them had one of these cards. Now we segmented to different levels within the organizations. We sent some to CMOs, some to VP, some to manager level. Depending on which one, it dropped them into a stream of content dedicated to that buyer. So you can see Uberflip loves demand generation. That was for the demand gen marketer. If we were sending something to the content marketer, the link was different. Everything else in the box was the same. Right? So we were able to segment our audience, and we were able to get a lot of meetings. We actually, first time we sent this out, we closed 2 deals. Really successful program for our team that we were really proud of. So the last thing last 2 things I want to do, once we personalize these experiences, then we have to make sure that we distribute and link back to it. Now, remember, the reason I showed you that Sony example at the beginning is because it sounds sensational, and it's like, that doesn't happen in B2B. That's a Sony problem, that's a B2C problem. Okay, so stick with me. Okay, so this was an email I got from a sales rep. I don't like making fun of companies that do bad things, so I always blur out. But I promise you this was legitimate, happened in January. And I was kind of intrigued what these guys did. The rep actually sent me a pretty good email. It was pretty personalized, clearly knew what I do, and he did the thing that I like, is a single call to action. He's like, I want you to click here. Just click here. And I was like, all right, I'll click here. I'm intrigued. I'm like, where are you going to take me? And then he took me to YouTube, and I was like, oh, no, you're like guilty. Like everyone, you're guilty. And I was like, I actually watched the video, mainly because I wanted to see what these guys do. And then, as I'm nearing the end of the video, we know what happens next, right? That slider comes out, right? And I was like, oh my God. I was looking at this thing, and I was like, Warren Buffett can tell me how to be rich? I don't give a shit what I'm reading about anymore. 2019 is my year, 10 picks, I'm done. I have no idea what the email was about anymore, right? That's how our mind works. We are distracted so easily. We need to keep control of our audiences. We need to do it, I showed you Blackbaud earlier, in ways where they link people to content and they have a flow of content, as we said earlier, for people to engage in. All right, last thing that we want to do, we obviously want to generate results. That doesn't magically happen at the end, but these are some of the things that my team tracks in terms of our content, so we understand what's working. I've got this chart in the book that I wrote. If you grab, you can definitely get it. You can get these slides like people have been asking about. And then we do a lot of things on our team, not just using the stats inside of Uberflip, but we'll layer data coming from Marketo, from Visible. We use a platform called Domo for BI, and we'll start to look at what content helped contribute to specific deals, right? Really starting to dig in from that perspective. So this is that framework, and you start to think about this, and you start to think about how am I going to send out 1,500 of these, right? It's just as daunting as how am I going to send out, thousands of packages, right? I liked hearing the company earlier talk about in the auto space of the way they were doing it now, and the scale that they were running into with the perforated cutouts. Right? We need better ways to scale, and that's where technology starts to come into play, but you do need a good process no matter what. All right, so starting to wrap up here, the idea is we really have to give thought to when you get back to the office and you've had all of these ideas thrown at you in the last couple of days, it's like, who's going to own something like this? And for the most part, people I'm speaking to here, you're not content marketers. That's perfect, right? Like, I think too often, when I wrote that book and I said, fuck content marketing, I wasn't telling content marketers they're useless. I was saying, their role is content creation, right? And that wasn't the intention of what the term content marketing was supposed to be, but we hired content marketers who were old, writers in their past or journalists. And we expect them to be able to figure out distribution and demand gen sometimes, which just isn't fair to them, right? It doesn't mean they're not capable, doesn't mean they're not adding value. They're adding a ton of value. But this idea of content experience really needs to be held within the entire organization, right? And then we're starting to see a lot of shifts in terms of how this is starting to happen. Quick little story for you. Friends of mine started a company called Blackbaud, now part of Oracle. And they came and did a talk for our team in our office at one point, and Steve and Paul, and they said, back when they were starting to sell Eloqua, there wasn't a buyer for it, right? Internally, they called them the weird marketers, right? Because there wasn't a term called demand gen or marketing ops. This didn't exist. And I think that's where we're at with content right now. We need that weird marketer, that person who kind of straddles different lines, right? Who understands that for the different things that we need to do in these stages, we either require a mix of different people, right? Doing different things. Right? Not all of which, as you can see, is the content marketer. Demand gen has a big role. The digital marketing team has a big role. Right? And in some organizations, you've even started to see this job title. Right? Really cool when you start to see that out there. We said at the beginning, it's been a big year for content experience. It really has when you start to see this shift happening in the market. So I'm going to leave with a challenge to you, right? It's not to go back, as I said, and tell your content marketer they got to redefine their role, to be a content experience manager. But it's to go back to your office and, in this bold type of way, do whatever you need to do it. Like for me, it's a Red Bull sometimes, a little AC/DC. I hinted at before, right? That gets me up, that gets me going when I want to stir things up. But you want to go in and you want to tell people, like, you can buy my book if you want to too, like slam it on someone's desk, be like, we got to be bold. And it's not this idea of fuck content marketing, right? That may not cut it in all your organizations. But what I'm hoping you'll all do is go back and really start to put a focus on this term content experience and define it in ways that are going to help your company grow. So I think everyone really appreciate this opportunity to be here in Montana with you, and I'll keep things going. Thanks a lot.